Well, hello and welcome. Jacob, of course, is trolling me like usual. How is everyone tonight?
What happened? Did I miss something?
No, Jacob just started me at maximum size.
Oh,
I usually start it like this because it's his show.
Other than Jacob enjoying his apple very much, how is everyone else doing?
Fine, very well.
pretty good.
Good, good. All right. So I guess we have two orders of business, I think, before we start.
I got the book
we-
too.
Oh,
Yay!
fantastic.
I got a book, and before I also have a recommendation for our next book too.
Okay, perfect. That's just in line with what I was saying too.
Here we go. This is the book. I don't know if you can see it.
The book of, can you flip it around? It's upside down.
Well, oh, it is okay. I thought it was just.
The book of Jewish knowledge.
Is that a Tolushkin book?
That's Chabad. That's the JLI. They just published it.
Oh.
So
Wow.
it's pretty cool. I mean, it's a joke because it's like a really big book, but it's pretty
Yeah,
cool.
we'll just complete that in a couple weeks, much faster than we did the Halakhic
Yeah.
Man, I'm sure.
We can do it.
Yep. So the rest of the book is pretty small, so we can either complete it in two more meetings, or 3 more meetings. You guys have a preference?
I don't think so.
It's about like 20-ish pages per week, or like 12 pages per week.
Well, Ben's not going to be here next week. Oh, yeah, you are.
Mhm.
The next time it's in 2 weeks, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Sandy, do you have any thoughts?
No, just looking at my calendar, so I think I'm good.
I mean, I feel like we can do it in 2 weeks, but I don't know.
All right. Since Ben is the only person with an opinion, it will be in 2 weeks. We'll do the longer sections. Yeah, and then the second point of business is like, do we want to do another book? Do we want to continue the book club? Yes, no,
Oh,
maybe
yeah.
so.
Next week is Pesach.
Oh,
Yeah, well, we do it every 2 weeks, so should be all good. So do you guys want to do another book after this, or do you want to take a break, or just not do any more?
I would be interested if you have something that I might be able to.
Okay, so Sandy's on board for another book. What about you, Ben? Are you on board for another book, or?
Yeah, I'm on board for sure.
Okay,
And I need to check that I don't have any obligations. But
going forward.
moving forward, but yeah, no, I'm kidding. I can definitely do another one.
Okay, for sure. And so, I mean, there are 2 books just off the top of my head. You guys can think about them. Maybe we should vote on it next week, but we, of course, have the sequel to this book. And for those, and from those you shall seek. That's the one Sandy has.
Mhm.
And then there's like the prequel of this, The Lonely Man of Faith, which I have that one and I enjoyed reading it. Or maybe another book. We don't have to continue reading from Rabbi Soloveitchik.
I can give several suggestions. This Is My God by Herman Wouk. And that is much lighter reading. And it's a much easier book to read, but it is a very good introduction, especially to people who may come from a Christian background to Jewish thought. Aryeh Kaplan books are always great. I am partial to Hasidic Masters myself, which is also, I would say, kind of light reading. But Aryeh Kaplan, I mean, there's a lot of good Aryeh Kaplan stuff. I'm trying to see if I have. Pirkei Avot is not a bad thing. Joseph Telushkin has written several introductory books to Judaism. One possible idea is some of the biographies. Um, if you guys are interested in biographies, there are. I know, for example, Elie Wiesel wrote a biography of Rashi, which I would actually be interested in myself. I haven't read it yet. Then there are works, classical works like the works of Maimonides. Either the 8 chapters or his introduction to Perek Chelek, or which is where we get the 13 principles of faith from. Or even the chapters on repentance from Mishnah Torah are really popular. I've never read the Kuzari myself. Kuzari is a early rabbinic work. It's so it presents itself as a debate, I believe, between a rabbi, a Muslim, and a priest in front of a king who's trying to decide which religion to choose. Then there's the Disputation of Nachmanides, which is actually pretty short, but that's a possibility. I'm just trying to think of things you guys might be interested in.
For sure. If you guys over this week and the next want to just send me some of your book recommendations, I'll take those and a few others and put them in a poll, and then we can vote on which book we want to read next.
Yeah, that sounds good. I'd be interested if other people also are interested in any books that they would want to participate as well.
For sure. And we can open this up to the Discord too to see if more people would like to join in for the next one. All right. And other than Ben having to dip out after an hour, as the Prince of Liechtenstein, he has many important duties to attend to. And so I guess we can just start wherever. You guys want to talk about anything in particular? Anything rub your minds? Sandy always has something. We can just let Sandy start.
Oh, yeah, it's like no pressure. I always start out having a trouble deciding. I keep saying I'm going to do better at that. Ugh. I keep staring at page 89, and maybe it's just all of the things that have been really hot topics of debate lately. But I know under section 15, it's talking about how Halakhic Man does not quiver before any man. He does not seek out compliments. He does not require public approval. If he sees that there are fewer and fewer men of distinguished spiritual rank about, he wraps himself in his mantle and lies awake to the 4 cubits of halakha. He knows the truth is a lamp to his feet, and the halakha is a light into his path. I could read that whole section if you want. It's funny. It's one of the things that I remember most growing up, even as a Christian, talking about how the word is, a lamp to our feet and a light into our path, and I'm like, that sense of just having that focus and that focus only, and that is his sort of strength. That really struck me, contrasting that with the homo religiosus, and that he sounds an awful lot more Pentecostal than not in that respect of wanting just to kind of merge with that upper,
Well,
dualism of world.
I'll say something that I think is important context for this little corner where we've been having a lot of these discussions, which is one thing that halakha does is ground you in community in a way that unfortunately I don't think many Christians have, which is if you are following the halakha, the only way you have Torah readings is if there are 10 adult males, right? The only way you can keep kosher is if there is a scribe and a slaughterer and what does not exist is the atomistic Jew, the Jew who lives by himself as a Jew in halacha, the way that Christianity too often allows. And so part of what keeps us from fragmenting into as small of groups as churches do is the community, just the fact that you need a minyan, right? And so if you need a minyan, you end up like different people making minions, and like it keeps, there is a sense of community in which I think the Rav can more freely say he doesn't care what anybody else thinks because he is grounded not in his own knowledge but in a community with other people.
Yeah, I can see that practically as well. Like trying to, like in my own life, if I think about like, okay, if I need to go to the synagogue, especially let's say on Shabbat, then you kind of need to, and this is what you kind of need to have. You kind of need to be close to the synagogue, and this is why a lot of communities have like real estate that they have around it, which is really interesting. But so it's very much so it kind of requires you, it constrains you to like you need to be close to everybody else and stuff like that. So yeah.
I'm not quite sure this question, but when you're speaking of the minyan and you're speaking of the being grounded, when I'm watching things right now, it's you can have groups, you can connect with people, but there's a difference between checks and balances that ground you because everybody has their place, and therefore you're balancing against things that are like and not like. When you're talking about the scribe and you're talking about, I'm sorry, I forget the like the slaughterer, the one who is in charge of making sure that it's appropriately done for the sacrifices and things. Like in the world I grew up in, you have councils, you have people that are decision makers. But aside from, the differentiation of an elder versus a deacon who might have a more practical, tangible role in, like they would often be part of home visiting. If somebody is sick, they arrange meals, they arrange something tangible and tactile that meets the natural everyday needs. But it doesn't sound like the same thing.
Well, I mean, when you're talking about a slaughter, like a ritual slaughter, like the only way you can get meat, like if you want to eat meat, you have to get it from the local kosher. And I mean, to some extent, you need a kosher baker, and you need because there are so many things which require interconnectedness. So when Ben talks about the Eruv area, right? So there, if you are a religious Jew, like if you live in Los Angeles, you live in particular, very specific areas, right? And you're part of that community. And so halacha, I mean, I described this when I was on this other channel and somebody brought up the Eruv, this concept of Eruv, which, I mean, Comedy Central has done, I think it's The Daily Show or whatever, has done at least one segment making fun of it. Because in a certain sense, an Eruv, and I'll explain what that is something comical and nonsensical, which is there are, in most communities, there's a string that is around the area that the Jews live, and you are, if that string isn't there, right, you can't walk out the door with your own house with your keys on the Sabbath, because you're transferring things from one domain to another. And when there is an Eruv literally means mixing, right? There's the Eruv functions as kind of like a border within which all of us are part of a community, right? And while did you have a question?
Possibly. Sorry, and my mind goes to, and I don't know if it says it in the Hebrew Bible or wouldn't be in the Torah, but the other portions. But in the New Testament, where it talks about God preparing a place and having a house with many mansions or many rooms. And your Eruv, when I talk about it being a single domain, reminds me of that concept.
Yeah, that's interesting. I haven't thought of about that. I mean, the Christian Bible does talk about a Sabbath day's walk, right? And you're only allowed to go so far outside of an Eruv. Within an Eruv, you're allowed to go the whole thing. But it demarcates an area that on Sabbath is all considered one part of one thing, right? And that's where the community is, right? Everybody tries to live within the Eruv. And yeah, in Los Angeles, like if you want to buy a house and you want one in the Eruv, like there are realtors who advertise that they're Eruv area experts, right? And so it's that halachic, the realities of the details of the halacha creates a community in a way that is part of what I was talking to Father Stephen about. It's very, very different from, at the very least, how in the West it's become a free-for-all. Oh, my neighbor goes to that church and I go to that church, and there's, if my church is half an hour away, or if I don't go to church at all, right, there's nothing that like really binds you in the same way. And that's why when, if you want to convert to Judaism, one of the requirements that every rabbinic court I know of has, and it's a requirement that the rabbinic courts have decided that they themselves, like it's not something that's halachically required, but it's something that they impose, is they require you to be within walking distance of a synagogue, because they're like, no, you have to live within the community. You have to become a part of the community. right? And so within that context, ultimately I can say Hanistarot Lashem Elokeinu, those things that are hidden belong to the Lord our God. I can say God will judge between you and me, but that's within the context of some form of community. Whereas I think now we've just become so atomistic, and that's why we're falling apart. And so when we talk about the loneliness crisis now, which we do, and we talk about the problems of our society coming apart, I don't think that translates well into what he's talking about, in terms of I don't care what any other man says.
Right.
Yeah, so I was curious about at the beginning. He mentions. Sorry, I have something in my mouth. I think. He mentions something about what page is it? On 78. He talks about something that I wrote down, like the ego is redeemable, or something about the self, how the Halakhic man, as opposed to the religious man, accepts the differentiate, like the subjective, or I couldn't really understand what he means there. Like I couldn't fully grasp it, but it was interesting to me, because also thinking about meditation, and I tried meditation like in the past, never really seriously, too seriously, but just thinking about all that conversation about removing the self, or letting go. There's a lot of conversation, so that felt like it was related, but I couldn't really parse it. So I'm curious if anybody else had some thoughts about that.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it seems like, I don't know, maybe he's attacking like kind of Buddhistic, if that's like a word, Buddhist thought or something like that, where like there's this idea of you becoming part of the one.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where he says like, what homo religios wants is unio mystica, attachment to infinity and complete immersion and dissolution into the supernal realm. So to me, that seems like he's suggesting like you stop having like an ego and you just become part of the one, right? Whereas earlier he's saying like, blah, blah, blah. Halakhic Man, however, protects his own selfhood, his particular, his soul's private domain, the I, the self, is also part of that concrete reality, which halakha purified and hallowed. In general, wherever the moral law reigns supreme, the sense of individuality becomes deeper and stronger. So I think he's saying kind of like, maybe in a way like the fence, like the 4 cubits of halakha, like the fence around the Torah, that is like your kind of little like nation, your little island, your like protection from being subsumed into, the one, so to speak.
Why wouldn't you want to be subsumed into the one?
Well, why? I mean, that's like asking for death, right? Like then who are you?
Mm-hmm.
You have to distinguish between unification and annihilation.
Right.
There's,
Speaking of bitul.
I mean, bitul, right? There is a sense of bitul, but which means nullification. But that nullification is not annihilation,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Right.
Because we still retain we lose our sense of yeshut, right? So that we are somehow separate from God. We recognize that that our existence is of God. But I mean, this kind of goes back to what we were discussing in the Mimer earlier today, which is there is a return of there's a return of the Shekhinah to the place where it was in the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
That does not negate the path that it took, right? It's not as if there was not the descent, right? So the Rebbe talks about how there was the descent of the soul, there was the sin of the tree, and
Mm-hmm.
then the coming of the Messiah is going to nullify that so that the Shekhinah is going to be where it was before before the first symptom, the first constriction.
Yeah.
But that's going to be greater. The analogy he said is when you destroy a house so you can build another one, you don't build the second one exactly like the first one, right? You destroy when you build a better one in its place, and that is what God is doing in this. And so when we have a bitul, right, when this unification with God, it's not a unification that is an annihilation. It's a unification that is greater joining
Right.
into something that's better than it was.
So I heard this anecdote. Staying on the same topic, I just heard this anecdote, and Jacob, maybe you need to help me. I just heard it from Rabbi Breitowitz. He was talking about some rabbi that used to be like a Hasidic court rabbi. I forgot, like Mir maybe, I don't remember. But anyway, he came from a more kind of like modern background, or like not really modern, but not as orthodox as he became. And Rabbi Breitowitz was saying how in his when he passed in his eulogy, people were saying, "Look what he was when he was a youth. He was playing basketball. He was in mixed dancing. He was like in all that kind of stuff. And now, and everything was like all that he left behind, and it was like nothing. And now look how great he became." And Rabbi Breitowitz said, like, well, that didn't sit too well with him, because he thought that was actually what helped that particular rabbi to actually connect and to bring more people, because he could show them how he could, let's say, talk their language in a way. And so I feel like that is, he didn't annihilate, if we connect it, he didn't annihilate his past or completely ignore it or deny it. He used it or unified it with this new direction that he had. So
I don't know. I mean, he may have been talking about Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan, but because Aryeh Kaplan grew up in a pretty secular home, and when he was around 14, his father had died when he was young, and when he was 14, his mother died, and he went to say Kaddish for his mother, and he didn't even know how to read Hebrew, and he went to say Kaddish for his mother at a synagogue, and he was befriended by a young chassid there. And by the age of 25, so over the next 10 years, he received the dayanut, which is the highest form of rabbinic ordination from the Mir Yeshiva in Jerusalem. And he then went back and got a master's degree in physics.
Mm.
And then he wrote a lot of books, especially for NCSY, National Council of Synagogue Youth, explaining Judaism in very simple terms to people who oftentimes had no background in it whatsoever. And I mean, incredibly. So he made the Ramchal, Rabbi Chaim, Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, who he is, and today how well he's known through his translations to English. And no, there's definitely a part of that where you have to bring everything, your whole life experience with you, as opposed to kind of, there's lower teshuvah, there's lower repentance, where you simply move away from the sins that you have experienced. And then there's teshuvah ba'ahava, there's repentance with love, where your sins in essence themselves become like mitzvot. They become as a zechut. They become a part of the good that you have done because you redeem them through your actions. Hello, Andrew.
How's it going?
Did you
How's it
actually
going?
do the reading?
No, definitely not. But the reading is by a guy in this Hasidic Masters book, yeah?
No,
No?
it is not.
Well, shoot.
But we did in fact mention what the next book would be, and that's one of the books I suggested. And yes, I am talking about Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan, who I believe wrote that book, Hasidic Masters.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
There's a discipline, and I apologize because the only back life experience that I have comes from my upbringing and my experience in the Christian community. And when Jacob's talking about the bringing all of the, you didn't just say sins, you said no. Anyway, something like that. But they have to be redeemed. I was listening from a place where back in my youth it was during sort of the I don't know, I think the Jesus People movement in the 60s had gone through earlier than that. But then everybody sort of in my circle of friends, they would get together for Bible studies and a coffee house where they could sing. Sorry, mixed singing. I am reading things. But then there was that thing which you would see people do at evangelistic things where you could have somebody stand up and they would give a testimony of their life. I've always felt a little bit of caution there because sort of watching the dynamic there was almost this sense of, there was a danger maybe more than a sense of towards a form of pride of saying, I was this bad and now I am. But that's in contrast to what this is about, which is saying, no, you're not cutting it. To cut it off almost allows that pride, but to bring it to be redeemed puts it into a completely different place, if I'm hearing that correctly.
That's a really interesting point because, I have definitely seen that. I mean, it does happen in Judaism as well, but I've seen it a lot more in Christianity, where you get people who kind of have a pride in their confession about, and so the halacha is that you are not actually allowed to publicly confess sins that are not publicly known. And that's the reason why I don't talk about a lot of my sins. That people who actually know me, they're kind of, oh yeah, that's Jacob. But like on the channel, I don't talk about these things because we don't publicize our sins. That I think is very different from not appreciating the skills that you have in what you do when you are living a halachic life, right? So I suppose I could decide, oh, you know what? All these years of I went to school, all these years of like my English and my Farsi and my Spanish and everything else that I've learned, I can leave that all behind, go live in Israel and go to a yeshiva and study, right? But the question becomes, why did God give me all the time that he did with all the things that he did and my own Yetzer Hatov, Yetzer Hara. So we talk about the Nefesh HaBahamit, the animal soul, which turns you towards sin. And one of the most beautiful things one of my rabbis said was, you don't kill your Nefesh HaBahamit. You don't kill your animal soul. You saddle it and ride it like a horse. Funny, Elijah.
Thank you. This was a difficult portion to read in some respects. There's always the difference of the language is one difficulty. But then there's the complementary difficulty of that I actually almost enjoy, but that doesn't quite sound like the right description of digging into the tough places and saying, oh, this reminds me of that. And then, yeah, my spirit or whatever portion of that I think from in that place that makes the connection sits with that for a while in difficulty and talks to God about it. So it's, yeah, thank you for the answers to those questions.
Oh, poor
Yeah. Lost him.
Well, I would say one kind of thing that maybe is very apparent, I guess, at the end of this one is I just don't know. I feels like the way that the Rav is describing the Halakhic Man is kind of untenable for most people, right? Because it's kind of like this ultra intellectualized, kind of form of religion where, he has this part where, like, on Rosh Hashanah, his father tells him that, like, instead of saying Piyut team, he should be, like, studying Talmud. And it's like, I just don't know. Like, I don't know. I've hung around the Jewish community, and let me tell you, there are people who have the title rabbi, and, like, you don't see them open a book of Talmud ever. You're like, you know Aramaic? Like, really? And so and like they usually come from, a more yeshiva Haredi background. And it's like, well, I don't know if they really like that, or like also people who maybe don't have like the capacity to study Talmud all day, every day. I don't know. It just seems like it's a little like I just don't know. Just strange that on the holiday, instead of actually doing holiday things, like you're like learning about the holiday. It's like, it's right there.
Well, okay, so this is the Litvak. This is the Litvak in the Rav. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna mention that this is what I was thinking about when we just spoke about in our previous call about Derech Eretz Kadma Torah, which so how I'm trying to map it here is, like I said, is like there's learning and then there is participating or acting or enacting. So it kind of felt like for me when he was saying on Rosh Hashanah, you learn the laws, like, yeah, I mean, obviously one is an ideal, but also an ideal from a certain perspective within Judaism. Like, I don't know if
Is this the section where he has the Chabad Chassid who is going to say who is going to blow the shofar and starts crying?
we passed that one, but I
We
feel like
passed
that
that
one.
fits
Yeah.
this one. Yeah.
Right. So I mean, there is part part of what has made Halakhic Man a important fundamental book for modern Orthodoxy is because he takes certain positions which I personally would reject, right? Now, I once made a siyum on which is a party celebrating finishing a tractate of the Talmud on the section of the tractate Rosh Hashanah on Rosh Hashanah, right? And I personally thought that was something that was in keeping with the holiday itself.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that the Rav would really disagree with the idea that, okay, this is the physical enactment of the Torah is certainly important, but there is this tension within the divide between the Lithuanian, what it's called, and Hasidic strains of Judaism, and really the big divide is often within Haredi certainly, and even modern Orthodoxy tends to fall within the Lithuanian strain as opposed to the Hasidic strain, which is we have a Chezi. It's like 3 a.m. there.
It's the Litvak in him.
The davening Nates, yes. So there is a Hasidic somewhat, and this is actually kind of like the controversy within Chabad as opposed to other Hasidic sects, because Hasidic dynasties, because those have in fact taken over have become more Lithuanian in their orientation as to everybody needs to learn, whereas a more traditional Hasidic mahalach way of looking at it was, okay, some people are the people who are supposed to sit and learn, some people study the Talmud, like this thing of daf yomi that almost everybody is recommended to do daf yomi. Like the most recent daf yomi cycle had over 100,000 people complete the daf yomi, which in 7.5 years finishes the Talmud. Before 30, 40 years ago, there were not 100,000 Jews in human history who had finished the entirety of the Talmud. There really was not, because there weren't that many Talmuds around. I'm sorry, right? Despite the silly things some people say. And so, yeah, I mean, again, I think part of what you're criticizing here is the Rav's modern orthodoxy. Maybe Chezi and Yosef would defend it better than I would, partially because I kind of do reject the idea that every Jew needs to learn Talmud, or that every Jew is capable of learning Talmud.
Yeah, that's my kind of problem.
Well, I mean, I don't even think that he's necessarily saying that but this comes from, I mean, a Lithuanian he's talking to what would be called chaverim, not amei haaretz, not the people of the land, right? And there is a stratification within Jewish society that the Lithuanian strain kind of takes, which is to be a halachic man is to be the, like, he's setting an ideal for what a Jew should want to be. And if you fail from that, you may fail from that. And in fact, he probably wouldn't even say that he himself, like, I can't imagine the Rav saying, oh, I am the halachic man. But he's setting a certain ideal.
Do you know what?
As he said, Yitgaber ke'ari. Gird yourself like a lion to wake up early in the morning.
Oh, so Ka'ari is like something like a lion with a lion, or like
a lion. Yeah,
Okay.
Yitgaber is it's in the so it's, I believe this is from Pirkei Avot. It's strengthen yourself like a lion. Yes.
Very nice. Let's see. There was one other part that we don't all get to see the Matrix fully. Okay. Okay, Hezi.
I don't know if you're still looking for Elijah, but I was just thinking that something that's connected to what we were discussing. I think when we were talking about retaining the self, or sorry, being inside a community. Also in 92 and maybe in 91 too, he talks about this dualism that he says is prevalent. That dualism so prevalent in other religions, which distinguishes between the man who stands before the Lord in an atmosphere suffused with heavenly solemnity. Thank you. And the man driving a hard bargain with his fellow in the marketplace. It's totally foreign to the halacha. I mean, that was interesting in itself. I wonder, I don't know why in my head it was connected to our discussion about the community, or, well, I guess it forces you when you're inside and so entangled with the community, which is also the community which is also the same people and the same thing that you worship with, I guess, and also do all those things, then all the day-to-day life is also like, it can't have that dualism because it's all so entangled together.
Right, and there is again a tension here, between what, for example, the role of a tzaddik, the role of the role of a righteous person who is a leader, as opposed to, Hasidim, right? Whereas in a lot of Lithuanian places, like, part of that was, no, there is a there was Chazi, I can't read what you were saying, but I mean, there is an aspect of, okay, my mitzvot are your mitzvot, right? I keep the same mitzvot that the Rebbe had to keep, right? And so there's a tension there, which, I mean, he's again, I think, taking a very particular side on, and that's his way. I mean, as we get closer to the end of the book, I think what he says becomes more and more particular and more his way.
The fish, yeah. I think in some part this section is also right, like a slight dig against Christianity, because he has this in this religious atmosphere filled with the thick clouds of incense and the echoes of hymns of the angels and seraphim, he divests himself of his arrogance, of his rigid, unbending character, and becomes the very model of meekness, self-embracing, and bowed down. And he leaves the same way he entered, humbled and submissive. However, no sooner does he step outside the noisy, clamorous street than he reverts back to his original persona, to his previous haughty and conceited self-centeredness. So, little dig against the Christians there.
Well, it's funny because I can see that. I mean, where I grew up, you could see that too. You would have, I forget the term. I was looking for it because I was thinking about this. I forget the term that we had for those for those group of people. So I could of like, I don't know, maybe we call them like religious for the holidays or religious for Shabbat, like Shabbat only religious. And these were people that were more. So this was kind of like a blue collar town, let's say. So these are just sort of kind of like semi criminals that would just like every day in the week will do whatever they want, and just cause chaos. And then on Shabbat they would go to the synagogue, and like I would go to, so it was on Yom Kippur, they all dressed in white and they kiss each other and kick twice. They know everything is, so that was kind of like.
Well, okay, Netanya. I mean, you come from a very particular culture of. There's a Sephardic. It kind of almost reminds me of like the Italians in like Chicago and New York.
Chicago, crime city. That's what.
Yeah. That's it's very funny, like especially on the server. I mentioned the Nachnachis, and you're like, I saw that. I would see. It's like,
that was like all over the place. For sure.
Yeah, right. It's kind of funny. I could see you becoming a Breslov. Don't become a Nachnachi. Become a real Breslov.
But I don't know. I could see him dancing on the top of a van.
I could, yes. I could, yes.
How do you know? Elijah, I don't know. I'm very curious to how do you know all these things. I'm very.
Oh, I had never heard of this. Dati lefi ledati. That's a cute one. It's a pun in Hebrew for cafeteria. Religious. I'm religious according to my religion.
Yeah.
Aren't we all? So I guess I do have one question. On the bottom of 81, Halakhic Man received the Torah from Sinai not as a simple recipient, but as a creator of worlds, as a partner with the Almighty in the act of creation. The power of creative interpretation, chidush, is the very foundation of the received tradition. When Moses ascended on high, he found the Holy One, blessed be he, sitting there tying crowns to the letters in order that future generations should, by virtue of their powers of creative interpretation, discover heaps upon heaps of law contained in every tittle. All new creative insights that a bright student will glean are an integral part of the oral law. Only man is capable of chidush, something which is beyond the power of angels. For since the Holy One, blessed be He, created them in a state of perfection, they need not and therefore cannot develop and progress. So it was interesting because, there's the certain Andalusian Sephardic boys that have certain opinions, and they were, but I mean, there was kind of an interesting idea that they were saying, like the binding of laws stopped with the shutting of the Babel of the Bavli, right? And so
Right.
that now, the certain people like to, add on and make a bunch of creative laws, and I wonder if chidush is related to that kind of the creation of endless laws.
Okay, so chidush. I mean, when ultimately you have to decide if you can use a microphone on the Sabbath, right? So, I mean, to some extent, there is again a tension here, right? Because the is it Proverbs or Ecclesiastes, Kohelet, which says "Ein chadash tachad hashemayim." There's nothing new under the sun, right?
Oh.
So how can you have chidush if "Ein chadash tachad hashemayim"? There's nothing new under the sun, right? And ultimately, what we would say is that Hakadosh Baruch Hu, God, tied these crowns on the letters, right? And all of it does come from Sinai, right? All of it is in fact from Mount Sinai. So this process of chidush is actually more a process of it's kafia and it's hafcha, like we were talking about, where you bring the light onto the darkness, and the darkness itself becomes part of the light, right? So, yeah, I mean, you're going to have a very hard time trying to. I'm guessing by certain Andalusian boys, you mean the Maimonides. You're going to have a very hard time finding too much of a divide between what Maimonides says and what the Rav says, because the Brisker method is very, very actually dependent on the Maimonides. And so, yeah, there is the fact is, when we say Elu v'elu divrei Elokim chayim, these and these are the words of the living God, means that ultimately, as much as I may in fact feel that I disagree with the Rav in certain ways, I can't negate the opinions of the Rav, because he stands speaking the words of the living God, right? And it's by keeping all of these in tension that you can more completely understand and apply. And I guess that is kind of the the process of chidush, right? It's a renewal. That's the chodesh, meaning month, right? Same thing. It's chodesh, and chidush is a renewal, and that's why I say that Hasidism is a revivalist movement, right? And so when Chezi says that maybe we need to put our pack down and decide that certain things we don't need anymore, I'm like, how dare you? Right? No, we need everything in the pack, but we may need to rearrange it. And in fact, we may need to start unpacking everything in the pack so that we can in fact use it. But that's what gets me nervous a lot of times about what Chezi says, because when he says Torah Chadasha Me'iti Tetzeh, that a new law will come forth from me, he means something that is in some ways divorced from the past, whereas I think the process of Chidush very much needs to be grounded in those crowns that God tied on Mount Sinai.
So I guess my question is more like chidush halacha or chidush drasha. Like, is it legal chidush or is it homiletic chidush, like a new way of looking or understanding the Torah, or like new laws?
Well, okay, so one of the things you have to understand about the Brisker method is that for brisk, there is no drush. There's only a and that's part of the Brisker method. But and that's part of the criticism of Hasidism of the Brisker method. Like, but so, I mean, I think there's a sense in which he is saying it's all about halacha. It's all about forget about crying when you blow the shofar. Just blow the shofar, right? And that's where Hasidism comes in and says, no, it's not enough just to blow the shofar. And I mean, Ben asked this question. He's like, well, why do I need to study these things in Hasidic philosophy of like the supernal worlds? And, today we were talking about like Zeranpin. And so why all this stuff, right? And the answer ultimately of Hasidism has been that unfortunately, without the crying when you blow the shofar, you end up not blowing the shofar anymore. And while ultimately we agree that all that matters ultimately is that you go ahead and blow the shofar, if you don't cry when you blow the shofar, you're not going to blow the shofar.
I have a couple of questions. They're one question, but with two parts. I'm reading what Hezi said on the side about not being a renewal, it's a rediscovery. And that makes me think about what I shared earlier in terms of how I was feeling my spirit connect to things in the past that I did know, but now I'm looking at them and discovering them again in a sense with new questions. But it puts me in mind of something I think you said, and I don't know if it was during the book club or somewhere else about, I think it was. Anyway, that at birth or pre-birth, we already knew all of these things. But when we come down into this life, it's like we agree to forget them. So what is the actual distinction between a renewal versus a rediscovery? Because if you renew something known, it seems to be about change within that other, which in this case would be the law, the Torah, the halakha, all of the components of what it is that I would be discovering if I renew them. Or is it speaking only to a renewal within myself as that person who would have known them pre-birth? What is the distinction that you guys are talking about?
Okay, so I have to disagree with Chezi. The Torah of Mashiach is not going to be different from the Torah of Moshe. It's going to be a continuation of the Torah of Moshe. You kaifer, but
happy to give you a moment to say that. Yes,
but look, what is the point of teaching you the Torah and then before you come into this world and then making you forget it? It's so that you recognize it when you see it.
When you see it, yeah.
Right? And so it's, Chezi says, Torah hi ve'tzarich ani lilmod. It is the Torah and I need to learn. And I would agree with that. That it is a process of discovery, but it's a process of discovery, and ultimately it keeps on. For me, it keeps on going back to the Rebbe's Mimer that Ben and I have been learning, which is before the world was created, our souls were with God, who is eternal and unchanging. And after the world has finished all of its things, our souls will be with God, who is eternal and unchanging.
Mhm.
But the image Maimonides has of the time of Mashiach is tzadikim yoshvin atarotehem berosham nenin ziv hashchina. That the righteous are sitting with crowns on their heads and enjoying the splendor of God's divine presence. So what does that mean? Like crowns on their heads? What's with the crowns? What does it mean that the saints are delighting in the glory, the splendor of God's presence? And the idea of the crown is that it's something external to you, but it's something that elevates you and makes you so much greater than you yourself are. And there you are having nachat, you're having pleasure from the fact that the Shekhinah, that God's presence has a splendor to it, has ziv. And I don't know if I'm explaining this very well, but it's not that there is a change in God. I guess Protestants would say sola gloria Dei, right? Everything is only for the glory of God, right? The creation doesn't change God. It changes our perception of God, our appreciation of God.
So I'm thinking back to what Ben and Elijah were reading from pages 92, 93. There's a contrast on those two pages. What they were saying about maybe taking a poke at the Christian concept of, you go in, when you leave the church doors, you go back to, back to the chaos of, your crime before the weekend. And then when you get to the Sabbath, you suddenly become on that page 93 where they list off all of those things. But in the middle of 92, where Elijah was reading, if I take a step down a few sentences, is it?
I don't think it's just a dig at Christianity. It's a dig at everyone, I think.
Yeah.
But go ahead, yes.
I was just bringing that up as in reference to where was I talking about? We've already emphasized earlier, Judaism does not direct its glance upward, but downward. The Halakha does not aspire to a heavenly transcendence, nor does it seek to soar upon the wings of some abstract, mysterious spirituality. It fixes its gaze upon concrete, empirical reality and does not allow its attention to be diverted from it. Halakhic Man does not compartmentalize reality. This is the domain of eternal life. This is the domain of temporal life. On the contrary, he brings down eternity into the midst of time. He does not enter into a hidden, pure, transcendent realm, even in his intimate prayer colloquy with his Creator. Even when Halakhic Man enters the synagogue or study house, he does not leave his this worldly life behind. His prayer is replete with requests regarding bodily needs, healing, prosperity, political freedom, a good and peaceful life, and such. The strange, disturbing dualism that blossoms forth in other religions is grounded in the fragmentation of life into many different sectors. And that's where we were reading about universal homo religiosis and going over into the contrast of, that boxing up of you singing the hymns and you're doing, things, but in living the halakha in the midst of everything else, it reminds me of what Hezi was saying earlier about living in the seventh day and waiting for the eighth. You know, we're already in the midst of the grind of everyday life and all of the needs we may ask for. We're still also living in that seventh day and looking for the eighth. We're in the midst of it now. It's been brought down into our midst. Is that related to what you were just explaining? Was my question.
I'm just gonna say goodbye because I have to go, and Chazi's gonna replace me. But thank you, everybody. Sorry, Chazi, that I can't.
Crown as the crown prince of where
All
was
right.
it?
Liechtenstein.
Liechtenstein.
There you
Okay,
go.
close. But yeah.
Have a
Bye,
good one.
everybody.
See you, Ben.
Shabbat shalom.